Well, the opposition joint party room meeting has wrapped up not too long ago, and Tony Abbott told his party room that, well, they have reason to be optimistic and confident, but that they should never be arrogant. He warned against hubris. So we'll wait and see how that plays out. Of course, the first question time just about 10 minutes away, and joining me here in the studio, Stephen Jones and Tony Smith, to take a look at, well, the start of this parliamentary year. It's been a pretty tumultuous start. Starting with you, Stephen Jones, the Prime Minister's first caucus meeting yesterday. What did you make of her warning to MPs and senators to stop leaking, essentially?
Look, I haven't been around that long, but I understand that's the standard leaders' lecture to the caucus. Something pretty similar was said by Tony Abbott to his caucus. Unity is what we need. Focus on the key issues for us this year, which is talking about our key reforms, the NDIS, rolling out the NBN, the Gonski education reforms, and keeping people in jobs.
You mentioned unity, but doesn't a message like that just draw attention to instability?
Well, look, as I said, it's a pretty standard leaders' message to the caucus. Let's stick together. We've got to play this as a team and focus on our key messages and our key policy objectives: education reform, the NDIS, the NBN, and keeping people in jobs.
Tony Smith, the warning about hubris, is that going to be Tony Abbott's biggest enemy this year?
No, well, Tony was making the obvious point that the Australian people want to have a good look at the opposition's policies through the course of the year. We've been a very effective opposition over the course of the last year, but he is making the very obvious point. It's an election year and an election campaign has begun. And of course, through the course of the year, the public will be focusing more on the opposition because they are crying out for an alternative, crying out for a government that is not dysfunctional and divided. Now, that was a good effort by Jonesy, but nothing's been standard from this Prime Minister
Can I say
in the last
Tony
week.
Abbott's biggest enemy are his policies. I mean, I can't think of a time when you had an opposition leader going into an election saying, I've got a tax increase for low-paid workers and a tax decrease for mining executives. Extraordinary, but that's what he's doing.
Tony Smith, Tony Abbott said this morning that the opposition will still prosecute the government in question time. Will that degrade Mr Abbott's efforts to be more positive this year?
No, the point is we've got a responsibility to hold the government to account. And the dysfunctionality of this government, which has been on display in the last week, I mean, it was a good effort, Jonesy, to say this is standard for a Prime Minister to say, please stop leaking and damaging the government. But look, you know what's going on. Your caucus is divided and the government's dysfunctional. That's why the Australian people are aghast when they see a government led by a Prime Minister that announces an election one day, has a reshuffle a couple of days later, and then, as we saw with Bill Shorten, says, I don't know what everyone's going on about. That's perfectly sensible. Now, that is, for the Australian people...
We saw also today Kevin Rudd appearing, being asked about leadership. It's almost a repeat of exactly this day last year. Stephen Jones, should Kevin Rudd be used more by the Labor Party in this election campaign year?
Yes.
And so how?
Look, I think he's an effective communicator and a good campaigner, and he's got a good following out there in the community. I know that he was very active in the last campaign, and I anticipate that he will be this year. And these are the things that people want us to be talking about. And I know Smithy would like to sit here all day and talk about himself and ourself and the internal mechanisms. I tell you, when I get about my electorate, it's jobs, it's cost of living, it is the bread and butter issues that people want to talk about, and they're the things we're focusing on. Policy.
Will Kevin Rudd campaign in your electorate? Or would you invite him?
I'd be more than happy to have Kevin down into my electorate to campaign. He did in 2010. I'd be happy to have him back.
Okay, Tony Smith, who would you rather face in government as the Prime Minister, Kevin Rudd or Julia Gillard?
Look, we are putting ourselves forward as an alternative. I mean, the chaos in the Labor Party, as Tony Abbott said this morning, it's a matter for the Labor Party to sort out their problems. The Australian people want to see a government focused on their problems. They've got a government that's focused on themselves and that can't make decisions. And when you see a Prime Minister call an election, then have a reshuffle, the Australian people rightly say, well, if they're that dysfunctional, how on earth can they manage a budget, which they now know they can't? Yeah. And to pretend, as Stephen has and Bill Shorten before, that this is standard procedure, to announce an election and then have a reshuffle. I mean, the Australian people aren't mugs, Jonesy. I mean, they know if a grand final team runs out and they run through the banner and they line up for the national anthem and the match starts, and then two players were to say, look, actually, I'm retiring. And the captain says, well, yeah, I did. I knew about that all along. And you expect them to believe, no, that's normal. That happens all the time.
You're right, Smithy, they're not mugs, and they know that somebody who wants to be the Prime Minister of this country shouldn't start his campaign by promising a tax increase for low-paid workers and a tax decrease for some of our wealthiest mining companies in this country. And that's exactly what he's doing. The biggest problem Tony Abbott has got is his policies, and this year we are going to talk about policies.
I won't let that go. I mean, this is a mining tax that's collected how much revenue?
Well, that'll be known
absolutely.
When the figures are published.
And I bet you
you're the only one in this country that wants to
it'll be a budget surplus promise.
Another matter. Craig Thompson has done an interview with Tim Lester from Fairfax. It's the first sort of sit-down interview that he's done since he was arrested last week. Let's just take a look at some of it.
No, not at all. There is, you know, I will see out this term as the very least that I will do. I made that commitment back in 2010. I knew what I was getting into, and I'm absolutely committed to making sure that every day between now and September 14 I can try and get the best result for the people I represent.
So Craig Thompson's going to be around all the way up until the election. Stephen Jones, can Labor quarantine itself from the damage that this may cause the party after supporting him for so long?
The allegations that are made against Craig are very, very disturbing. I understand that he's in court tomorrow to defend those charges, so neither Tony or myself can say too much about that. They are before the courts. They are before the courts, and they should be dealt with by the courts. I've been saying that since day one. But I will say this:
would you rather see
as a former union member and union official, every single cent of union members' money should be going towards advancing and defending their wages and conditions. That's a principle that I've lived my life by, and I think that any other union official should live their life by. Craig will have his day in court. He'll be able to defend himself. Well, look, that's a matter for Craig. I'm focused on dealing with the issues that are before the Parliament and the issues that are affecting my electorate, and the matter that Craig has got before the court is not one of those.
A response to that, Tony Smith?
Well, look, he's given an interview today and he is in court tomorrow, as Stephen said. And in less than 24 hours, he'll be in court. We've given him a pair to facilitate that. And I didn't see all of the interview. I saw some excerpts on your news just a little while ago where he was talking about Labor pre-selection and all the rest. But I'm not going to say too much ahead of it.
What about the criticism he made of Barry O'Farrell's comments? Barry O'Farrell, you'll remember, made a joke about Craig Thompson being accused of taking his clothes off in front of strangers, therefore he shouldn't be worried about the strip search. Was that appropriate?
I'm just not going to engage in commentary on this.
That's unrelated to the case, though.
Well, look, they were Barry's words. He's in court tomorrow. He's chosen to give an interview today. That's his business, but he's in court tomorrow.
Okay, this morning George Brandis said that, well, quote, in effect, the caretaker period has already begun. Tony Smith, that's technically incorrect, isn't it?
In effect? Well, it has. The Prime Minister's announced the election. You know what? An hour or so ago, Trish Crossan agreed. She said, let the campaign begin. On Twitter.
You know as well as I. I mean, this is a
tweet if you like.
That'd be a good idea.
This is a guy who's a QC and wants to be the Attorney General of this country. He should know better. This is a glorious start to the mob who want to be the alternative government. They can't even get the basics right. They cannot even get the basics right. Caretaker starts when Parliament is dissolved. Every baby member of Parliament should know that. This bloke who wants to be the Attorney General of this country, a QC, can't even get the basics right. Well, his legal advice to the Liberal Party has been pretty poor over the last 12 months. Chalk another one up.
Did he overreach?
Chalk another one up.
This morning?
Of course he didn't. Look, Labor members know the Prime Minister's announced the election, and there's been a number of things said. Greg Hunts and Andrew Robb have made the point with some government grants that people ought to be on clear notice. We've got a different view to the government and we won't be proceeding with it. That's a responsible thing to do. But when you call an election 227 days before polling day, I mean, you don't have to take my word for it. You've only got to read the newspapers and read what Labor members are saying to journalists about the Prime Minister's decision.
Here is what George Brandis was saying. You can imagine a boss who employs somebody to do a day's work and they decide to knock off at afternoon tea time. That's what George Brandis is asking the Parliament to do. Knock off with still, you know, a quarter of its term left to run. He's asking people to sit on their hands. What a joke. What a joke.
Question time. It's already on the screen. You can see it there. So thanks very much for your insight. Good luck for a big year ahead. We look forward to talking to you.